This week on the Wheelhouse, we're talking to the candidates. Rosa DeLauro, Michael Massey in US 3. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse. It's a show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. Today we're talking to the candidates for Connecticut's 3rd Congressional District, incumbent Representative Rosa DeLauro and challenger Michael Massey. Principal cities in the 3rd Congressional District are New Haven. Middletown's one of them, and so is Stratford. Today's show is part of a series of interviews we're doing with political candidates in our state, hoping that we can keep it as civil, I guess, as the vice presidential debate was last night. Maybe we'll be able to do something like that. Talking with both sides, Republicans and Democrats, in some of the key races in Connecticut. Last week, we spoke with candidates for Connecticut's 1st Congressional District. If you missed that live, you want to catch up, listen to the podcast, you could also go to ctpublic.org/wheelhouse. Up first today, Michael Massey, a Republican candidate. Michael, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Good to see you. Good to see your face this morning. If you got a question for Michael, give us a call. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677. Michael, start off here. Tell me about yourself and why you're running for a seat in Connecticut's 3rd Congressional District.
A long time. Well, I'm a forever New Haven resident. I'm running because in these urban cities, and this is like my passion, I feel that we haven't been represented correctly. This is where the most crime is, the most prostitution, drugs, anything you want to name about how horrible America is, it starts in these urban cities. And me being from Connecticut, I believe this is one of the best states in the world. It's just these urban cities, there's a lot of problems out here, and our leaders aren't trying to fix them. Either that or they don't know how to fix them.
You want to fix it. I understand you care very much about criminal justice reform. You yourself,
Yes,
formerly incarcerated, and I think that's part of your story. Kind of help me understand that as well, too, Michael.
Yeah, like since I was a teen, I'm getting in trouble. I have 5 sisters, 1 brother. My mother had me when she was 16, and I'm not even the oldest. And my dad, he was on drugs for a long time in my life. So, like, the streets been it was like a big brother to me growing up. That's where all our role models are. And when I went to jail, I just had an epiphany. I had 2 kids, and I feel like we have to do better in these urban neighborhoods. When you speak to people, I know people that never even had a fight, and it's just like, it's so wild how different you grow up in these urban neighborhoods than the more affluent neighborhoods. And I figure we need representation or somebody that at least been through the problems, that know how to fix them. Our leaders right now, I feel like they're just guessing.
Michael, help me understand.
Problem.
Yeah, help me understand how you're going to fix it. I was listening to you did an interview with Paul Bass. Paul Bass, great friend of ours. He's with the New Haven Independent, a great journalist, former guest on the Wheelhouse. But you guys did an interview. You talked about EBT. You're trying to make sure that people have more access to the cash and the support that they get. And you're also talking about some prison reform as well to make sure that incarcerated people can get more money for the jobs that they do there. Help me understand that if you can.
I believe the private sector should employ people in jail, even at $5 an hour. If you're working 40 hours a week, after 5 years, you can come home with $40,000, $50,000. And when you come home from jail and you're flat broke, you leave with nothing. You've been in jail, probably fighting, and you just have a hard life. When you come home and you're on your mother's couch, you tend to go back to what you knew. But if you're in jail working this whole time, even if it's not paying much, you're still in the working spirit. You come home with a little bit of money. You have some breathing room, and I think that's important. Like we concentrate too much on punishment and not the rehabilitation. These people come back and they're in our neighborhoods. Our children look up to these people, and
do you think
we should.
Do you think, Michael, that the private sector will help out here? Do you have any kind of relationships that you could leverage, or I don't know? It's going to be a lot of pressure on you if you can get this job and become a congressperson. So how are you going to get the private sector to help you out here?
I would say we need to start bringing these jobs back from overseas. They move overseas so they could pay people less. We have the workforce here in these jails. I mean, we have the largest jail system in the world. These people, they need to be rehabilitated. They need to be in the working spirit. They need to come home with some money so we don't have to take care of them.
The Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade in 2022. States across the country limiting access to abortion, even in life-saving circumstances. Would you support legislation to ban, Michael, or limit access to abortion care nationally? Help me understand that one.
No, I wouldn't. I think it's the right thing to do to send it back to the states. This is Connecticut, and we have no problem with abortion here. I believe that the people should have a say in the matter. And like I said, this is Connecticut. Abortion is not our issue.
But I think, and you saw this come up in the vice presidential debate last night. It was a back and forth between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz about what the states are able to do. Some people are hurting in other states. It's not in Connecticut, but as we said, some people might be struggling because limited access is limited to abortion care nationally. So do you have an idea of, if you were in Congress, whether or not you would support a national abortion ban?
No, I would not.
And then if you wouldn't do that, I'm also going back to that Paul Bass interview because that was a big help in preparing here. It sounds like you support a person's choice to get an abortion, but I want to understand again that state aspect of it. Does that kind of conflict with a person's choice in your eyes?
Repeat the question.
If a state says that you could only do, if a state limits access to abortion, does that conflict in any way with a person's choice? So would you protect a person's choice over, say, a state's right to make a law over abortion?
I believe the people should be able to vote that person out and vote the person in that aligns with their way of thinking.
You're running against Rosa DeLauro. She's a leading figure nationally in the push for a permanent, robust child care credit. Parents in Connecticut struggling to find affordable child care. What are your plans to improve care accessibility for families across the state? I would imagine it'd help a lot of people in New Haven, Stratford, Middletown, people looking for access to care for kids locally for help. How can you help these families?
I have a policy. It's called baby bonuses. It's a financial incentive. I believe if we can have the people vote to defund illegal immigration, that money could be allocated to get these single women a $5,000 bonus just to have a baby, $10,000 bonus for married couples. I believe this will help in the abortion debate.
So, Michael, help me out understand here. Would you try to, I don't know if we lost you there. I think we still have you. We lost Michael temporarily. So right now we are talking with Michael Massey, who is a candidate running for office in US 3, running against Rosa DeLauro. We've had a conversation so far. We've asked about reproductive rights. We've also asked about a couple of other key issues. We've gotten to learn a little bit about Michael. Michael, formerly incarcerated, as I understand it, from watching an interview that we had with Paul Bass. Paul Bass is another local reporter that's in the New Haven area. I'm stalling for time a little bit here, folks, trying to give you a prize of what's happening. But in that interview, we learned a little bit about Michael, and that Michael was formerly incarcerated. was in prison, and you can help me fill in the blanks here, Michael, but you saw something on TV, you learned about Donald Trump maybe, and you got into politics.
Yeah, is my camera doing okay?
I don't have you on camera right now, but we still got your audio, so you can go ahead and talk.
Yeah, so I'm watching Donald Trump's speech. No, let me start from the beginning.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in prison, they have a white TV, a black TV, and a Spanish TV. This day, Donald Trump is about to talk, so we're watching CNN, and on the white TV, they're watching Fox. And it was this old black dude that I used to play chess with. So I asked him, like, why are you over there watching Fox when we're about to watch the same thing over here? And he told me he just want to hear what Donald Trump has to say without seeing him spinning it. And he was like, matter of fact, just come watch this with me. So I watched the speech, and he asked me how I feel about it. I said it was a pretty good speech. It seemed like he really cares. He want to do something with America. And he said, now go over there and watch CNN, and they're gonna say it was racist. They're gonna say it was divisive. They're probably gonna say something about sexism or whatever. And damned if I ain't go over there. And they said everything that he said, like it was like it was a Nazi speech or something. The same speech that I just said, I liked it. CNN is saying how terrible it is, how much he hates this person and that person, and they start pushing. Well, he didn't really say it. It was a dog whistle, which only means is this is what I want you to think he was saying, and it changed me that day. I started.
You voted for Trump in 2020, was it? More. You were able to get out of prison, and then you think you voted in 2020?
Yes.
So you voted for Trump in 2020. You're here now. You're a candidate. Go ahead.
This is the first time I ever voted.
First time you ever voted. I wonder, Michael, if you gave CNN or another organization or something like that another shot after that, because you sound kind of like you have policies on both sides here, not necessarily just Republican, but you have some ideas as an urban candidate. I wonder maybe if you were both sides here, you could do Democrat, Republican. Maybe you're trying to reach out to Democrats. How would you reach out to people in the cities on affordable housing? Help me there.
When it comes to affordable housing, I believe we need access to cash more than anything.
Need access to cash, you're saying? Sorry.
I believe Connecticut does a pretty good job in affordable housing. But the main thing is these people grow up so poor, and the culture is terrible in these neighborhoods. I believe my policies will help with that. I have a policy called student investments. When you shut down apartment education, and now we would allocate that money to parents of these children that are getting honors. Up to $4,000.
So a lot of your plan is kind of similar to what we're hearing with, I think, with Rosa DeLauro and Kamala Harris nationally, where we're talking about getting more money to families. And I think some of the Republicans are having that too.
I think we need to bypass Congress and get that money directly to the people.
Understand that. What about, like, in terms of affordable housing? Like, what about rent increases? Could you go after landlords with some kind of federal policy or something like that? Would you do that, or would you shy away from that?
I would shy away from that. Like, these people, they paid a lot for their lives and for these homes. We need to stay away from putting restriction on private companies, private landlords. The private section work that out. If you're charging too much, people aren't going to rent there.
Hey, just really quickly, can you help me understand here as we finish up the interview here? This is the end. What you would do to reach across the aisle and maybe work with Democrats nationally if you're elected. Help me understand how you would try to work with your colleagues in Congress.
I'm not an extreme partisan. I actually just became a Republican 8 years ago. I was pretty atypical. I mean, I don't hate Democrats. I don't dislike our leaders right now. I just feel that these urban communities are underrepresented. We need at least one person in Congress that has been through the life that I've been through. We're not going to fix things if we just have leaders that's just guessing how to fix the biggest issue in America, which is people getting killed in these urban cities.
Michael Massey just recently got involved in politics, now running for Congress. Really exciting to have a local candidate involved in this race. Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Michael.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll hear from challenger and incumbent, another local individual in this race, obviously, Worcester Square's own incumbent Representative Rosa DeLauro. Have a question for Representative DeLauro? Give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. We just heard from Republican candidate for the U.S. Congressional 3rd District, Michael Massey. Now I'm joined by his challenger, very privileged to have right now on the line, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro. For our listeners, good morning, Congresswoman. Good to see you.
Great to see you. How are you?
Where are you today? Are you in New Haven, Connecticut?
I'm in New Haven. Yeah, I'm in my house in New Haven. Yeah.
Very nice to see you live from New Haven, Connecticut this morning.
Thank you.
For our listeners, some of these questions are similar to the ones that we posed to Michael Massey. We want to just get a great idea of where these candidates fall on the issues. Congresswoman DeLauro, great to have you on the show today. Folks want to ask the Congresswoman a call. You get a rare opportunity to ask a question to a Congresswoman here, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Congresswoman DeLauro, just an incredible career here in terms of longevity, longest tenured House member in Connecticut ever. I would imagine that comes with some pushback there as well. What would you say to people who say that you've been around for a long time and maybe it's time for a change? What would you say to some of those kind of folks?
Well, I think what you have to do is to take a look at what's been accomplished and take a look at what are the initiatives and the accomplishments that I've been able to achieve over the years, which has to do with of understanding the legislative process, which working collegially with colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and being able to pass legislation that has been making a difference in people's lives. I think that's what people want to know about. That's what they want to see, is you understand what their lives are about, and that what you're going to do is to try to help to make that difference for them and their families.
Collegially is a great $10 word there, because I would imagine that it's an incredible time right now working in the United States Congress. You guys just got the continuing resolution through on avoiding a government shutdown. But I would imagine, and I heard your speech, something that you don't want. I would imagine you'd want a more permanent resolution. So what can you do down there at a time where it's not so collegial, I guess? What can you do to try to deliver some of these permanent measures?
Well, you do work from both sides of the aisle. I mean, my counterpart on the Appropriations Committee is a Congressman Tom Cole from Oklahoma, a Republican. Congressman Cole and I have worked together for years, not only as a chair and ranking member of the full committee, but with the Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education Subcommittee, which is where all of the health programs, all of the education programs, and work training and apprenticeship programs, where all of those programs reside. And Tom and I have had a very close relationship in getting those bills passed. And what we need to do is the continuing resolution is not a way to govern. And Tom believes the same thing, that what we need to do, when we get back, which is after the election, is to make sure we hammer out the appropriations bills, all 12 of them, and pass them before the end of the year so that we can provide the American people with the services that they so desperately need in their lives.
Parents in Connecticut struggling to find affordable childcare. I know this is a very issue that is very close to your heart. What have you been doing, and what do you plan to do to improve accessibility to care for families across the state? Obviously, not at a local level here, but at the federal level.
Well, I mean, two areas. First of all, child care is critical in today's lives. And, we're very easily persuaded that if the automobile industry is in difficulty, that they should be bailed out, that the airline industry, that we should take care of them. And child care is a major industry in this nation. And if you might recall, during the pandemic, women were pushed out of the workforce. They did not opt out, and they couldn't, there was no way for childcare. And it was a very, very serious issue. And on that score, that most recently in the current bill, the current funding bill that we are living with today, is I was responsible for increasing child care by $1 billion, so that we could increase the opportunity for child care, that we could pay child care workers what they deserve, and they're taking care of our kids, and to make that difference. And the second piece of that is, as I think that I am the author of the child tax credit. I've been working on the child tax credit for the last 20 years or more. And in the American Rescue Plan, President Biden signed it into law, which provided the biggest middle-class tax cut in a generation, including helping to lift out millions of families out of poverty, lower the hunger rate, and that it only lasted for a year. And now I'm working very, very hard to make it permanent. And when I listen to people who talk about the child tax credit, because this was the opportunity for families, working families, middle-class families, to be able to afford childcare so that they could go to work, that they could afford to put food on the table, that they could get school supplies for their kids, so that they can deal with paying a rent, dealing with housing or a mortgage. And there's significant data that says that this is what they use a child tax credit for. It is the antidote to inflation, and one way in which to deal with the inflation issues today, a very successful program, which we should make on a permanent basis. That is what I will be fighting for.
Congresswoman, just to kind of follow up here, as a journalist, but as a parent first and foremost, it's been quite dismaying to see at the local level here, at least, a lot of the money, obviously, with ARPA dollars have gone away, and that stood up kind of the child care industry, at least locally here in Connecticut. So we here at the Wheelhouse and Connecticut Public have been trying to figure out and follow up, figure out how much money could come through to support child care and early education. But it sounds like the state and many other states are waiting for dollars at the federal level. So it sounds like this has become sort of a federal problem to solve. So that, I guess, as you work here for a permanent child tax credit, do you have any kind of updates or any kind of information that might make parents, that might make early educators feel better here, that maybe more money will come through for families?
Well, first of all, that it did for 2024. We were responsible, and I was responsible for providing an additional, this is beyond the American Rescue Plan, $1 billion for child care. You can talk to the state of Connecticut and Commissioner Bai. We worked very, very closely together about being able to increase the dollars for child care in our community. I think it's interesting and you mentioned early childhood education, which I have been a very big proponent of. In the Republican Project 2025 proposal, they would eliminate Head Start, which is early childhood education, which is really, foolish in terms of our youngsters' education. So that it's not a wish for the future that I've been working on, but have in fact produced the dollars that we need for a child care industry, and as well for the biggest tax cut for middle-class families in a generation through the child tax credit. And if you would take a look at the economic plan that Vice President Harris has proposed, that at the top of her list is the expanded and improved child tax credit, which is modeled after my legislation. And it's the $6,000 for families, including a bonus for newborns. And not only that, but Congressman Walz, or Governor Walz, I served with him as he was a member of Congress, but as Governor Walz, he has implemented a child tax credit in the state of Minnesota. So that issue has become a flagship issue for the Democratic Party. And so I think it bodes well for thinking about how we provide families. Today, the biggest issue facing families is cost of living.
Yep.
Cost of living. They struggle paycheck to paycheck. So programs like the child tax credit, like what we've done with child care, is
Congresswoman, thank you for that confirmation. I only got a few minutes left in this interview. I want to make sure that I get it to you. I'm asking you too many follow-up questions here. I apologize. 888-720-9677. You got to call quick here if you want to be able to ask the Congresswoman a question. 888-720-9677. Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade in 2022. States across the country limiting access to abortions. I don't have to tell you about this, Congresswoman. You know a lot about this. I imagine you're trying to work to protect the right reproductive rights. Help me understand what you would do to kind of continue on here in the wake of the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade.
Well, what we have to do, and we can do this through the Congress, is to make Roe v. Wade the law of the land. And Vice President Harris says that that a piece of legislation that she would support. And quite frankly, no woman should be held hostage by their geography. Women need to make the decision about their families. They do that with their family, with their conscience, and with the people that they have the most faith in, including whatever their religious background is. They make these decisions. The fact of the matter is, it's what is at stake here is that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle refuse to respect and trust women in the decisions that they make about themselves and their families. And it's really, in fact, the Republican goal to ban abortion, making it harder to access family planning care like birth control or IVF. And I have legislation that would expand IVF coverage so that those who want to start a family can. The Women's Health Protection Act, which I referenced earlier, would once again make Roe v. Wade the law of the land. And Kamala Harris said she would sign that as president. She would sign that legislation.
Congresswoman DeLauro, you're talking about here, if reelected, making this the law of the land. Roe versus Wade is something you'd work to do. You're talking about the expanded permanent child tax credit. Help me understand how to solve the great riddle that is affordable housing, particularly, obviously, at the local level, issues with planning and zoning. How does the federal government kind of counteract that?
Yeah, well, that's, you've hit the nail on the head. The housing issue is one that is a serious issue, not only in our community, in our state, but that is nationwide. And just this very year, what I did was to fight against the really drastic cuts that the Republicans wanted to do relating to the home program. And the home program is the only federal program that builds affordable housing. And what they intended to do was to seriously cut that program, and I fought against it. The Transportation Housing Bill, which is an appropriations subcommittee, includes investments in affordable housing, and it includes investments for seniors and people with disabilities as well. I also have a legislation that would allow people who are subject to evictions, and that mostly happens to single moms with large families, is that giving them the opportunity to get legal counsel, and the way that their housing employers do, but this would allow individuals to be able to seek the kinds of counsel that they need to be able to stay in their homes. We also need to address the homelessness issue. And I know in the city of New Haven and elsewhere, cities like Los Angeles are doing a great job in trying to make sure that people have a decent home.
Congresswoman, we do have a comment here from a listener. This is our last question for you. This is Jacob from New Haven, very local. I want to ask the Congresswoman about what she is going to do about student loans. I was enrolled in the same program, and now it's being blocked by the courts, is what Jacob said. Do you have an update for Jacob there? Here, last question.
I'm happy to do that. Even with regard to what the courts did, Jacob, and you're right, it's another issue. When I say that families today are struggling, people like yourself struggling to try to make ends meet, and then you have to deal with student loans, and you've got the courts who thwart that effort that the president has been engaged in, and even with what the court has done, the president has in fact created opportunities for students to be able to get relief from student debt. It's a serious issue, one that and the other piece of this is I want to protect students from what are called predatory colleges that charge people money, don't provide the kind of degree that gets them a job and takes their money, if you will, and runs. Those are the kinds of things that have to stop. We need to provide opportunity for people to put money back in their pocket, to give people the opportunity to get an education and not be saddled with debt forever. The courts have been responsible for this. We need to turn it around legislatively, which is what we're working at and what the president is working at.
Thank you to our listener there, Jacob from New Haven. Jacob, if you were listening to that answer, why don't you give us a call, 888-720-9677. In the next segment, maybe you can react to that answer from the Congresswoman. It's always great to have somebody address a caller there. We appreciate it so much, Congresswoman DeLauro.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for being on with us live from New Haven today. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Coming up, we're going to unpack what we just heard from both candidates with Bilal Sekou, Associate Professor of Politics and Government at the University of Hartford, and Massey, founder and CEO of the Narrative Project. You got a question? Give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Been talking to candidates for Connecticut's 3rd Congressional District, the incumbent Democrat, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, and her Republican opponent, Michael Massey. And now you're looking at a lucky man. We're going to unpack some of what was said in our expert panel with some great guests. Massey, founder and CEO of the Narrative Project, also teaching at Quinnipiac University. You saw Bilal there. There's Massey. Thank you so much, Massey, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for coming up today from the New Haven area.
New Haven.
Also with us, Bilal Sekou, Hillier College Associate Professor of Politics and Government at the University of Hartford. Hi.
Go Hawks.
Indeed, the Hartford Hawks. Hey, as much as I would love to talk about sports, the Hawks, maybe your Buckeyes, whatever, I want folks to know that if they got a question about something they just heard from our candidates for Connecticut's 3rd Congressional District, let us know. Call 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Hey, Bilal, we heard both candidates explain their stances on some major issues. We got a little bit of childcare, housing, criminal justice reform. Where do you want to start?
Well, first of all, those are really, great questions. And I think they're the kind of questions that are on the minds of a lot of Americans, especially the question around childcare and housing, which are, two really critical issues. I think we saw a sharp contrast between the two candidates. I think clearly Mike is, someone who is out there who's running. He's got a great story in terms of the background, but I think, it was clear it wasn't a great interview by any stretch of the imagination. And I think, from this standpoint going forward, Rosa DeLauro, of course, who's been in the House for a number of years. And, if you're asking me, and I'm not a New Haven resident, not a part of her district, I think she's clearly on the path to being reelected. And this debate or this discussion really demonstrated that there's a huge gap between the two candidates.
Massey.
Yeah, I think one thing that just putting these two interviews side by side makes me realize is there is a fleet of, there are a fleet of candidates on the GOP side that are just not prepared for office in any way. I think that what we're seeing from the Democratic candidates are a polish, right? A preparedness, an understanding of the issues, an understanding of the policy proposals. One thing that I was really disappointed to see from Massey was, give me a policy that I can latch onto. Give me something to take back to New Haven, where my friends and family live, who are, that they can latch onto, that they can go back right home to and say, this is what I'm sending my kids to school on. And there just isn't enough to chew on there. Whereas DeLauro came with her record, ready to speak to that record, ready to give you numbers, had policies to think about for her next term in office, which I think we are preparing to see.
I'm going to take this in a positive level, though. I mean, we take democracy very seriously, and we have to. And look at me being the unserious person all the time. But I think in America, we don't like to expose ourselves too much. We don't like to show our butts, as we might have seen a Michael Massey do here today. But, it's okay. Yeah. Michael, I think, was in prison 4 or 5 years ago, right? So he's new to this, right? Right. So, maybe that polish does come with time if he sticks with us and maybe turns to a couple of news stations perhaps and not just one. Maybe you can get that, but maybe you can have an opportunity where you don't excel here in the first race or something like that, and maybe you get better in the future. Right. I don't know.
For me, just 2 points very quickly. One is I love his story, and I think this is the kind of story that really needs to be heard by a lot of people. Here's someone who went to prison, has come out, and wants to give back to his community, which is just an incredible accomplishment on his part, and nothing, you can't take away from that. And so certainly that's the case. The second problem, I think, though, is that, clearly this is probably a race that not many Republicans wanted to run against DeLauro. And so they came up with a candidate just to have as a placeholder. But it really, just taking a step back, and this sort of gets at what Massey was saying earlier, is that, you develop candidates, you do candidate training, you do the work to do so that they're much more polished when they do the interviews. And so clearly this is also showing a failure on the part of the Republican Party in general in the state in terms of picking a candidate, doing the kind of work to really polish them up with regard to being able to talk about the issues, to talk with, and to be able to do that and do that effectively. And clearly that didn't come through. DeLauro has been in office for a long time. She's got a long record of accomplishments and a record of activity in Congress. And so she's just able to talk about that more easily. And I think it clearly showed.
On the other side of what we just talked about and me being positive, what happens when you don't get policies to latch onto is you can end up kind of arriving at dead ends.
Right.
So I got there a couple of times in the interview. So there's this interesting thing where I think Michael a lot sounds like he could be reaching out to people on both sides of the aisle a lot of times, criminal justice reform, whatever. But you get stopped into this kind of dead end space where as a Republican candidate, a lot of times we're hearing that you can't kind of get involved in what the states are doing, right? That's a big thing with reproductive rights. Or you have to bring in the jobs from overseas. You have to bring them back home, which is a lot of things that we hear when we're talking about working with private sector companies. So you kind of get into a dead end there with criminal justice reform. So I don't know. Are we seeing this issue a lot nationally where we kind of get stuck where we have to feel like we have to be either a true Democrat or a true Republican or a true third party this?
Oh, well, I mean, we don't have enough time to talk about the fact that, the two-party system is not working for us right now, right? But I will say, the pros and cons of really the existence of a candidate like Mike Massey is, we are seeing an uptick, Bilal. I think we've talked about this before. We are seeing an uptick of Black men in particular who are leaning towards the Republican Party because they do not see themselves represented adequately in the Democratic Party, right? And so what we see in Michael Massey's existence as a candidate is really calling in a demographic of people who don't feel seen, who can give them an example of, listen, I don't have to be the polished guy. I don't have to have X, Y, and Z degree or 40 years of experience in policymaking to know that my neighborhood is this and needs this, right? And I think that's the appeal of a candidate like Mike Massey. But where the issue is right? When we are stepping up to the plate or the microphone with only talking points and no policy points, it doesn't do our communities any service, right? I'm someone from New Haven, born, raised, and stayed, right? And, I in my bio, anywhere you see, I put in my bio that the only thing that makes me different from other people from New Haven is I'm just an inner city kid who went to college, right? So I resonate with Mike Massey's story, but I'm not seeing how we get from point A to point B where I see policies that impact my friends and family.
Right. And actually, when you think about it, the natural progression for someone like him should have been first step, city council, perhaps,
Absolutely.
or something at the local level, and then you move up. To jump immediately into a congressional race is just crazy. But at the same time, and this is the other part, I grew up like you. I grew up in the city of Detroit, and so his story really resonates with me. I had friends of mine I grew up with who went to prison, drug addiction, all of those kinds of things. But what struck me about the contrast in this, and I think it's just the general focus of the current presidential election, he is raising, I think, really important issues about our cities, issues about criminal justice reform. These are things that really are important in communities of color, and they are not a part of the conversation. And so while certainly child care and other issues are things that are very impactful in communities of color, but at the same time, if you're a Black man and you're living and you grew up in a city like New Haven, the criminal justice system is an issue that needs to be addressed and talked about. The state of cities in terms of jobs, dealing with crime. So all of those kinds of issues are real issues that need to be addressed, the state of the public schools. But unfortunately, those are not the ones that are really being focused on this election cycle.
Let me try to recover after getting knocked on my butt by Mercy and Bilal here, telling me about their experiences growing up in the city. Some great testimony there. I appreciate it, but like I messed with Michael there a little bit there, talking about, you get your news maybe from one source or whatever. But I bring that up to say that I want to be able to sometimes talk about issues in two different ways, right? Like racism, for example. I want to be able to give somebody a perspective, especially a Black man, to come on here and say that maybe racism doesn't exist. That's fine. We want to be able to talk about that, but we want to also give you the other side of that coin. I think we do that here at Connecticut Public. I think we do that at NPR. Like, to be able to say that, hey, you have your opportunity to say that you don't think that maybe racism exists, but to also then have the opportunity to say that there's a lot of people out there that do think that racism exists, obviously. So let's talk about that.
So I think it is an ill-informed position, but it is one that, exists with reason. I think that there is an entire demographic, an entire faction of, I'll just stick to Black people. I'm not even talking broadly speaking people of color, but there's an entire faction of Black people who feel as though it's the inner locus of control and outer locus of control, right? If I push off all of my issues on the existence of the big bad R word, right, the big bad racism, then it means that I didn't have any autonomy to make the decisions that that could have landed me in one place or another. And I really respect the mentality and the thinking of formerly incarcerated individuals, because that comes from a place of like, I made these decisions. I had the autonomy. I chose the life path that I chose, and it got me to the place that there's a 1-2 step for that kind of thinking. If you extrapolate that, when you put that in the lens of racism, if there is something else that is responsible for my failure or my oppression in some way, my poverty, my inability to seek housing, to secure housing, my inability to secure a job, right? If there's something else out there, that's unattainable. That's harder to tackle. That's harder to solve for. But if it's me and the autonomy is all mine, then there's a little bit more wiggle room. That is in alignment with the idea of the American dream that works really well. The American dream doesn't allow for space to think that racism is the problem, because otherwise, what about those bootstraps?
Yeah, I don't know if I can say anything even more eloquent than what was just said. I think that really captures the tension that really exists. I think the other part of this, conversation, there is a segment of the Black population, I consider myself to be a part of that, who are middle class, who are well educated, have decent incomes, and also that tension around structural inequality and the role that structures and institutions play in creating inequality really creates an interesting sort of discourse within the Black community about to what extent it's about structures and institutions and to what extent it is about individual sort of decisions and choices that people make. And all of that is sort of wrapped up in this broader sort of narrative about, the American creed, about hard work and individualism. And so all of that tension is there, and it's real. But I think, again, what is appealing to me and I think very powerful about his story is that we often look at people who have been formally incarcerated or people who have felony convictions, and we really discard them, and we find no place for them to come back into society and to really contribute. And he's defying that kind of an argument.
Absolutely.
Let me go here. So you have Donald Trump as a role model to this individual, to Michael Massey. So help me understand what's appealing to Michael Massey with a Donald Trump. Yeah. What's appealing?
Personally, he's not appealing to me, so I can't really answer the question completely.
I don't got an answer for you.
Yeah.
He's messing with you a little bit. We talk about this a lot here on the phone.
But it's really bizarre to me. But I imagine, part of, Trump's appeal, and again, this gets into this larger narrative around individual person responsibility. He is someone who is looked upon by a lot of people. He's created this public image of success, and again, and this has, it's challenged, but it really, people have not effectively been able to really challenge that sort of illusion that he has created about his success, about what he stands for, what he wants to accomplish. And if you're someone who really is looking for that opportunity perhaps to start a business, or someone who really has sort of bought into that individual sort of narrative, then, certainly what he is talking about can be appealing.
I got to jump you because I got to have you address the Congresswoman, because we only have 2 minutes left, and I've been talking a lot about Michael Massey here. So help me understand what we could take away from the Congresswoman here today.
I mean, you have someone who obviously has a record that you can rely on, right? You have someone who understands the policies and works actively every single term that she's been elected, which has been a lot, right? You can trust her to go to D.C. and get the job done. Those are the pros, right? I think the cons that DeLauro will be up against is this ongoing and justifiable conversation about there needing to be a new guard of leadership in our nation, right? And here in Connecticut, we understand that our leaders are aging, and there's a new generation that is excited to lead, and probably a line out the door once DeLauro decides that, she won't be seeking another term. She's 81, and I adore her as my Congresswoman, right? But at the same time, when it comes down to it, I understand that there is an entire generation of a new fleet of individuals who are eager to run, and a new fleet of individuals who are looking for leadership that represents a new age.
Last question, I had to give it to you quick here. So you have then the choice. So if you don't want to support an 81-year-old Congresswoman, do you just dump her for Michael Massey, the new shiny red toy here? Or do you just do that? Or do you just continue to go with somebody that...
I think ideologically, it's not... It all depends on what your motivations are for this election cycle, right? And I think that there are several individuals in New Haven specifically who will relate to Michael Massey's story. I understand it. It resonates with me. I have friends who have been incarcerated. I went to high school with several people who have been incarcerated and who are coming out and starting lives anew. But I don't think that the comparison is something that is rises to the level of consideration of dumping DeLauro.
You can't judge somebody by their age. You can't judge them by the color of their hair. Mercy Quay, founder and CEO of The Narrative Project and teacher at Quinnipiac University. Thank you so much for coming up here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for slaying and looking great, too, while you did it, too. I appreciate it. Bilal Siku, he looks great, too. Thank you. Hilliard College Associate Professor of Politics and Government at the University of Hartford. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Sure thing.
Second of 5 candidate interviews. We'll hear from candidates for Connecticut's 5th Congressional District on Wednesday, October 16th. Grab the popcorn for that. Next week, we get a break from the local races to talk about the Electoral College and what everything's going to look like in the country. Thank you so much for joining the show. Today's show produced by Chloe Wynn. Thank you so much for following us on our stream as well. This is The Wheelhouse. See you next week.